So I was sitting on the edge of the desert. I was filthy, hungry, and scared. The men who brought me here, I thought I could trust, but something went sideways. Something went wrong. So all I wanted was this grand adventure, get away from the status quo, get out of my life, but now I'm stranded here in the Middle East in the desert with no way out. So I'm going to talk about how I got kidnapped in Petra and what I learned from this. But isn't this a great hotel? You guys need to wake up. Hey, I'm up here, okay? When I walked through the doors after this long journey here, the first thing I saw was the water sculpture, and it just made me go, and it made me feel at home. And that's what's so great about being here. After we checked in, went to our room, and we went and had dinner and started sipping wine, we started looking around, and the whole dining area was serene. And I just thought about the team here who has to book for world-class architects and suppliers that everyone's going to be going around, God, I think I would have done this to this place, or I would have done that. But that's not my problem, because I'm not an architect and I'm not an interior designer, although it's a hobby of mine. I love it. I am a world traveler. I have a master's in psychology, and I am an author of the book Soulblazing. And what I do is I help people get in touch with their authentic self. And that is so rewarding. And architecture and psychology do overlap, because that's what you guys do. Architecture really helps people get in touch with their inner self. And that we need serenity, we need harmony. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, about the 60 countries that I went to and how it changed me and how I look at architecture and myself and life. So I thought this quote was great. Any architectural work that does not express serenity is an error. How many of you agree with that? Okay, how many of you apply that in your work? Yeah, some of you. Okay, I hope by the end of the talk, more of you will. It all started when I was in LA. I moved there to be an actor, and it was my dream since I was 10 years old, because my maternal grandmother came over one day and said she would have 5 girls, marry a foreigner, and one would be a star. And I said, I get to be the star. And I'm like, what is a star, you know? And what it meant to me was freedom. It meant that you had enough money to do what you want. You could travel the world and do whatever. So that was always my goal. So I'm in LA and working, and I'm doing well. And then I started getting better roles. And then once I got to the point where it takes you to the next level, the small, meaty parts that you get, but with big stars and in good films, everything was nudity. 10 seconds of nudity, 20 seconds of nudity. I'm like, I can't do it. My father's from Baghdad. He'll come up here with an Uzi and kill you guys and kill me. So I didn't even have a choice. And my agent said, if you don't do it, then just go home. You always have to do it. Then I was living across the street from Sandra Bullock at that time, before Speed. And then she's like, Lisa, you know what I had to do? I'm like, what? She goes, I did 8 seconds of nudity. I'm like, no. She goes, I had to, otherwise I couldn't get to the next level. And that's actually the film of the producer who got her on Speed because they fired somebody. So she's like, if I didn't do it, I never would have got this, and this. So I realized, you know, what my dad had told me, if you go up to LA to be an actor, you're just going up there to be a whore. And just because you're on camera doesn't mean it's okay. And I'm like, oh my God, there's something about this that's right. But I realized the women aren't the whores, it's the men in charge that try to manipulate them into doing things unless it's really right for the part. But my close friend who I'd done several acting parts with, he was a beautiful guy, and he was getting he-too'd while we were getting me-too'd on top of everything. And he had a plan B, though. He's like, I think I need to quit, because he compromised his values, and he said, I'm being haunted. And you saw the depression with people, what they were going through. And he ended up joining the Peace Corps. So he's like, you want to come? I'm like, no, that's not my calling, but I have no plan B. I don't know what I'm going to do. So then I thought, let me play this out a little longer. And I got offered a job for HBO with a top television star, who this was his first big film role. And I was so excited about it, but then the whole movie I'd have to be nude. He was sculpting me, and I'm like, no. So I'm like, okay, I have to quit this business. What else am I gonna do? I have no plan B. So I was, binge watching TV and the news and stuff. And then Christiane Amanpour comes on the screen. And she's in Bosnia, and I'm like, oh my God, I love her. She's so fierce. She was just talking to all these reporters and everybody over there, and I'm like, wow, that's a fun job. That's kind of like acting, but in real life. How exciting. So I thought, that might be good. And as I kept watching, I saw Saddam, and that's my dad's country, and I thought, that's something I can do, because I just lost all passion for life. I just thought, what's the point of living? It's redundant, it's boring if you can't live your passion. And I thought I could go to Iraq, because it was weapons of mass destruction, axis of evil, Saddam's the devil. And I'm like, I could go over there and see, understand my culture. Then I was watching it, they were saying about a bus ride that goes from Jordan to Iraq, because there's a no-fly zone. So they said on this bus ride, sometimes they kidnapped Americans and held them for hostage, or they killed them. And I thought, oh my God, ding, 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 genius moment. Why don't I go there with the intention of getting kidnapped? I'll get cubic zirconia and have it in my hand. I'll have a couple $100 bills. I'll take Louis Vuitton, and I'll go on this bus ride. So that was my plan B then. I put everything together, and I go off to JFK, and I'm there, excited, nervous, and I'm watching all these people around. It's mostly large families, from the Middle East going back home. And I see this woman there by herself, and I'm like, watching her, and she wasn't talking to anyone. And then when a chair emptied next to her, I kind of scooted over there and sat down and said, hey, what's your name? And, we exchanged names and started talking. And then she ended up saying, I said, are you going to Jordan? She said, no, Iraq. And I said, who are you going with? She was by myself. I'm like, are you crazy? Do you know what's going on in Iraq right now? She's like, yeah. And then she said, I'm going there to get on the bus to kill myself. She said, I hate my life. I'm the 9th child, and they're making me be a lawyer. I have to marry this guy I don't want to marry. It's a whole life that she didn't sign up for. She goes, I want to be a dancer. I want to live in New York, LA. I want to be creative, and they won't let me. So she said, I'm sick of living a double life, and at least if I die there, I'm going to see my country, and I'll die. Oh my God, she's so honorable. She loves her family and her roots, and it'll save face. So I went, oh my God, I'm going there to get kidnapped. Why don't you join me? And then we could write a book together. My idea is I brought a camera, to document the terrorists, have them kidnap us. Then I would convince them to do a documentary with me. Then we could write a tell-all book, called How I Transformed from a Terrorist to a Humanitarian. And I thought, I think it'll be a bestseller, then I'll get on CNN and all this stuff, and then I could become a war reporter and skip the normal route. She's like, oh my God, I love it, let's do that. So off we went. There is Ashley. So off we went, flying, and then on the plane ride, we got to know each other. It's a 10-hour flight, and then I showed her the cubic zirconia. We practiced what we were gonna do, and then we get on the bus. And we go to the back row, because it was a bench seat, and we felt like we could, really assess things. And after about 2 hours, 2 military men come on. And then they start asking for passports and papers. So then when they come to us, I get my backpack, and I had a little pouch, and I'm like, okay, here's my passport. Oh my God. Then Ashley's like, oh my God, that's thousands of dollars of diamonds for your uncle. You got to get that. I'm like, oh my God, put it back. And then they said, well, we need your passport, we need your papers. They're looking at us like we're strange. Then there's a couple $100 bills. I'm like, I shouldn't keep this money like this. And then I showed them the papers, and they're, oh, thank you very much, please be safe. And they leave. We're like, oh my God, what? The news is saying that they kidnap people. How much more do we have to do to get kidnapped? And then this continued. It was an 18-hour bus ride, 4 more stops, and nobody heard us. Everyone smiled, told us to be safe. You'd think that they just came out of some, how to be a good host, tour thing. So there we were. We ended up going to the El Rashid Hotel, because that's where Christiane Amanpour went, and that's where all the dignitaries go, because it's in the green zone, and it's supposed to be really safe. But when we walked through these doors, this was such a grand hotel. It was supposed to be one of the nicest hotels in the world. It was so dingy and run down because of the sanctions for years. And you could see everybody there, how the building affected them. It brought anxiety and depression, and people who went there, everyone's walking around so sad, and even all of our housekeepers just came in the room trying to talk to us and telling us what's going on. And then we started watching the news and talking to people, and they said there's protesters out there hating Americans right now, so be safe to avoid that area. So we said, oh, why don't we go to that area? So we went over there to the protesters, and then it was starting to finish, and then they're starting to disperse, and we went up, hey, we're Americans, we're Americans. And then they're like, oh, hi, salam alaikum. I said, no, we're Americans. They're like, oh, yes. I said, you were just saying, down with America, revenge, we hate America, America is Satan. And they said, oh, we have to do that, otherwise we'll get arrested. What they do is they just gather who's ever there, and we have to start saying stuff. I said, really? He goes, no, we love your people, it's the government, it's all bullshit. And we're like, oh, okay. And they said, come. Habibi, come to our restaurant. You eat for free here. And I said, no, we don't have to eat for free. Because when you went in the restaurant, it was so sad. They had like no food left. They had like 3 or 4 eggs, like stale pita bread. And I'm like, no, you eat it. They go, no, guests first. So we were eating and talking, and I said, so do you think Saddam has weapons of mass destruction? And he's like, shh. I'm like, what? He said, the walls have ears here. You have to be careful of everything you say when you're in this country. And I said, okay. So as we were talking, getting to know who they were, it started letting me think about what the media feeds us and what's really happening. And then they told us that every 2 years, expatriates go to Iraq to help fix the conflict between the West and them. And he said, all the dignitaries are there. If that's what you want to do is interview people. So we said, okay. So we found our way in to the place, and through our moxie, we got in and got to get at a table. And then we spot these guys. Do you know who these dudes are? Yeah, you do? Yeah. That's Tariq Aziz, the foreign prime minister of Saddam, and this is Taha Ramadan. And there they were, like, close to us. I'm like, oh my God, we could interview them. And they're on your way to be a war reporter. So we were waiting for the perfect time, and then we beelined over there as soon as there was a chance, and we started talking with them. And what they said was talking about architecture. They were talking about monuments and structures and how important it is to the culture, and how when they're decimated, how people get depressed because nothing brings them together, because that marks history. And then when you're seeing it, you're part of history and you're with history right there. And that's what the following generations need. And then as we were talking to them, saying, asking them questions, personal questions about Saddam and, what's going on in the world, we were pulled away. Someone grabbed us and said, you're not allowed to be here. You're not supposed to talk to them at that table, and pulled us away. They said, you can't do that. I'm like, well, they said, you have to ask permission. I'm like, if I have to ask permission, you guys aren't going to let me do it. I said, this is what journalists do. You have to just go and do it and be brave. So that was an experience, though. So we got to talk to a lot of people there, all these expats that were there from all over the world. And these were some of the monuments that we went to and saw, and the meaning behind each, and how the people really felt about the structures, and how it brought families together and communities together, and without it, how that wouldn't exist. And then when I got back home watching the news, I saw this, and I saw all the protesters there saying, oh, America saved us, and no more Saddam, we're free. And I'm like, oh, those are like the same protesters. Now they're supposed to say that on TV. And it was really sad. And what that did was, talking to people over there, it was like the end of an era. So this monument marked that. And that's just amazing to me, because everything has such deep, special meaning. And the whole people there, it was like this is a documentation of their philosophies and culture. And this was now an end of an era. And people were scared because they didn't know, like, if the Taliban was going to be in power next. Saddam was a tyrant and he was horrible in many ways. But what's next? You don't know. It could be like Afghanistan. At least they had freedom there. So our trip in Iraq was finished, so we're going back to Amman, and we hitch a ride with humanitarians that we had met there. So it was a Jeep ride, and it was a little quicker and nice, and we were sharing stories. But we wanted to just go to Amman to relax, and a couple of days before going back home to LA. But we thought, let's spend the night here, a few nights, and let's go to Petra in the morning. So we go to Petra, and it's just the opposite of Iraq. It's majestic, it's beautiful. I mean, look at that. And we were there, and we were just sitting there thinking, you know, who built the city and who made it so magical? You know, who just carved all these ornate features? And, you know, Jim Morrison had said he had gone there and he got visions, and that's what helped him with his music. So we're like, oh my God, we're in this magical place, and we want to soak it in, and let's just go there for a day. So then I see this guy with a hookah pipe, and I go up to him and say, oh, Muhammad, how are you? And he's like, oh, like, I don't know who you are. I'm like, Muhammad, you don't remember me? And he's like, no. And I'm like, I'm Lisa. And he's like, and I'm like, okay, I'm kidding. He's like, I said, we've never met. He goes, how'd you know my name? It was because whoever we met was named Muhammad, our Jeep rider, the person who checked us into the hotel, everybody was Muhammad. So he's like, okay, don't call me Muhammad. I'm Hubbly Bubbly. I'm unique. I love the hookah pipe. So I'm like, okay, Hubbly Bubbly. So he's like, what are you guys doing here? And I was like, oh, we're going to go to Petra for the day, a few hours, and see it. Any advice? He's like, you come with me. I will show you the real Petra. I'm like, the real Petra? He's like, yeah, the real Petra. That's for tourists. I'm like, oh, but it's so beautiful. And he's like, no, I show you the real Petra. He said, for $10. I'm like, $10, that's a deal. So he said, just give me a few minutes. I'm going to go get things and whatever. I said, okay, great. So we start walking around just waiting for him and just soaking in this majestic environment, going, oh my God, we're going to get to see this. This is where so many movies were made and just so much magic. And Hubley comes back and has a car. And I said, oh, what, do we need a car? He goes, yeah, we're going to go up there. I said, okay. So we jump in and we start talking. He starts telling us about the Nabateans, how nature created this beautiful place with the Nabateans. Do you guys know Nabatean art? They're Assyrians, Hellenistic, and Roman architecture all combined, which creates the uniqueness of Petra. So we're just fascinated by that. And we're driving up, and then he stops, and he opens the door, and two other guys get in, and they are Omar and Abdul. He said, these are my brothers, and they scoot in next to us, and we're sitting there going, oh, okay. Then we're like, hi, Omar and Abdul, and they sit there just angry. Then Hubley doesn't talk much, and we're like, how are you, and where are you from? They're like, not talking. We're like, oh my God. Then we start traveling, and everyone starts looking like ants as we're winding up, and we're like, oh my God, we wanted to get kidnapped or killed, and this is where it's going to happen. It didn't happen in Iraq. And then we just held hands and stood there. Then we just start busting up laughing so hard because we were so scared and nervous. Then they try to shut us up, and we're like, oh my God, this is it. So we're driving, then winding up further up the road, and then they stop. And they unload the car, and they say, stay in the car, and they go around, and they're putting stuff behind this wall, and we're sitting there waiting. Then they said, okay, you guys could come out now. And then we came out, and then they said, come around here, and we went around, and we saw this. It was a cave with all these candles everywhere. And there was like a couple of dozen people there, and they were eating. There were campfires and storytelling, and we're like, oh, what is this? This is so beautiful. And they said, for you see the real Petra. You're going to eat real food. You're going to eat with the real people. This is where we live. And we're like, wow. So we're sitting there eating and sharing stories, and then they kept saying, why are you two young girls here? You're alone here. How could you do that? Does your father know you're here? I'm like, oh, we don't need permission from our dad once we're over 18 or 20. We're like in our 30s, we're good. He's like, no, your dad's permission. I'm like, no, it's okay. And then he's like, but what about children? Don't you have children? Don't you have husbands? I'm like, no, we didn't want husbands or children yet. We're going to maybe do that later. They said, oh, so sad. I mean, no. I said, in America, everyone's independent. We all have our own choices. We could do what he wants. Then he went, oh, I get it. I'm like, what? He's like, Pamela Anderson. I'm like, what? He goes, America, Pamela Anderson. You love drinking, sex with many men. You like enjoy life, and you like running on the beach in slow motion. I'm like, no, that's not America. They're like, so they got bootlegged DVDs. That's the only show they got bootlegged DVDs of. So they think all of America is this. And I remember in a Borat movie, he did the same thing, had a Pamela Anderson thing, trying to take her home in a suitcase. I'm like, oh my God, so this is their vision of America. I said, no, that is not America at all. So it was getting late, and we were talking, and I was saying, it's time to take us home. And they're like, oh no, we don't take you home. Then I said, no, we got to go home. We're at the Four Seasons. And he's like, no, you have to stay here. I told you have to see the real Petra. I'm like, we already saw the real Petra. Please take us home. We're just in our little skirt. It's hot. We're dingy, sweaty. We're tired. It was like 120 degrees all day. And he's like, no, you have to stay. I said, where? He goes, in the cave. I said, we don't want to stay in the cave. And he's like, you have to stay in the cave. Like, but we never agreed to this. All of a sudden, he lost all his ability to speak English, and he walked away, and then he came back and threw a couple blankets and said, here, you guys could stay here. Then Abdul and his brother were standing right next to him. Then we're like, okay, I guess we have to stay. So we went into the cave, and we're like, oh my God, we pushed our luck. What's going to happen? Now we're here alone, and the other people were leaving, so now it's just these three guys. So we just thought about, Ram Dass, be here now. So just be in the moment. We're okay right now. But we're looking out, and even though we were so scared, we're looking at the environment. We're looking at the colors changing, and we're looking at the rock formations, and we're looking at the black sky with these beautiful white stars. And it reminds me of architecture, of how you could bring in, nature to buildings. It's so important, because even though we were scared, for some reason, we were so happy and feeling relaxed in a way of whatever happens, happens. And then we start to fall asleep, dozing off, and then I start hearing a noise. I'm like, what is that? Is that an animal or something? And I hear footsteps, and then Hubley peers his head in the cave and says, Lisa, come here, I want to show you something. I'm like, no. He goes, come here. And, I went with him, and then I said, what do you want to show me? And then he says, come, and we took a little walk. And then he said, let's go on this magic carpet ride. I'm like, a magic carpet ride? He's like, yeah. So we got on this ride, and it flew us through all of Petra, and we got to see it from thousands of years ago, from the Nabateans creating it and carving everything, and the beauty and the majesty of it all. And I'm just like, this is so overwhelming. It was like a kaleidoscope of visions of, I don't know if any of you have done plant medicine, but it's similar to that. But it was just stunning. And then we finished the ride, and I got off, and he said, thank you. And then he said, now that is the real Petra. And I'm like, oh my God, that is so beautiful. And then he went to give me a little kiss. He said, may I give you a kiss? And I said, no kiss. And then he's like, okay. So I go into my cave, and Ash and I are sitting there, and then she starts to wake up, and then she says, oh my God, Lisa, I had the most amazing dream, so magical. And then I said, me too. I was on this magic, carpet ride, flying through Petra and everything. Then who has dreams like that? And we thought, if we didn't go to Petra and be in that cave, that dream inspired a whole book called Under a Baghdad Roof, which is my next book that's coming out next fall, about all these cultures and what it brings and what community brings. And there are people who had nothing, but they had everything, because they're at campfires, and everyone did a different job. This was the handyman, this was the driver, this was the person who cared for the kids. Everyone had a job, and they were together all the time. So it was breathtaking, and we were just laying there with the rocks, and then we said, okay, let's get up and go get Hubley and his brothers. And we get up, and we're looking around, and there's nobody there. So, we're hungry, we have to pee, we go find a bush and squat and find leaves, and we're like, where's berries? We're hungry, or what about food from last night? And then we're like, oh my God, there we were at the edge of the desert, and we were filthy, hungry, and scared, wondering, how did we trust these guys? How stupid we were. You don't just get in a car with somebody. And then we were stranded there in the Middle East. And then we started to hear something after a couple of hours. And we're like, oh my God, let's go wave that car down. So we're going to wave them down, and it happens to be Hubley and his brothers. And we're like, what happened? We thought you left us. Then he said, no, we went to go get you food. I'm like, what time it is? So it was 8:30. And we thought it was probably 6:30 because the sun comes up so early. And we're like, oh my God, we were scared. He said, if you accepted my kiss, we would have left you. He said, that was a test. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, I don't want to be just some silly note in a postcard. He said, I am a person and I have feelings. And I just thought about that going, oh my God, that's so weird. He thinks we're Pamela Anderson, so we would do it so I could resist this guy. And his skin was so thick, I don't think he showered in months. He had straw hair, and his 3 remaining teeth were rotting. And I'm like, wow. He had so much confidence and such keen intelligence that I just adored him at that moment. And he was just like family to me, and I just felt so close to him. And I'm like, wow, this is what life is, something that you're afraid of, and once you get to know, there's a community there that's built. So my takeaways from this were staying at the El Rashid Hotel. It was broken down and dingy, and how that affected people. And it wasn't just, they had the basic necessities and everything, but is that all we need? And it's not. We learned that before we thought cubicles were probably bad, but now we know for a fact cubicles are bad. And it's about neuroscience, which is the study of the body and brain and how they respond to built environments. And this is so important today because I think because of finances and just being functional, we've lost our vision of how to create spaces that really help the individual. And this, again, is how psychology and architecture overlap, because psychology really helps you with the mind and focusing you and teaching you methods to stay calm. And that's what architecture does. When you go into a place that's so beautiful and that brings in nature, you can't help but just feel better. It doesn't matter how gorgeous a building is. If it doesn't have nature, it ruins your cognitive ability, your mental stability. So the lesson 2 was architecture and community. So here we are. I wanted to use this slide because saving the Iraqi culture, this is what kept them together. There were so many suicides there. There was so much depression. But the team together, here's like 5 people pushing it up together. And when they teach their kids, we've got to stick together. We're all one. We're all one people. That's what gives you a sense of belonging, a sense of, being part of something bigger than yourself. I think here we are all into, we're independent, it's all about us. Even in families, it's different. Families aren't as close. And when you're around that closeness of everyone really loving each other, it's really something special. And it reminds me of when I went to Ayers Rock. Have anyone been to Ayers Rock? That's in the middle of Australia. We got one person over there. Yeah, I went there. I was at the Sydney Film Festival, and I kept hearing about this monolith isolated in the desert, and I thought I have to go there because everyone's talking about it. And I flew there, and I went to, of course, they had one hotel, a 5-star hotel, and the rest was camping grounds, and it was sold out. And I'm like, no, I need the hotel. And they're like, no. So I went to the campground. There's 20 women that stay in one place. And they partition it off, so there's 4 of us together. And each one of us was from a different country. One was from Berlin, London, Japan, and me. And we were like friends that have not met, that haven't seen each other for years. We bonded, we went to this place together, we climbed this monolith, we went all the way to the top, and all the people who were there were so beautiful. Then we went back afterwards, and we were eating. It was a campfire. We were barbecuing. There was music and pool. And I'm going, if I had gone to that hotel, which we went to, everyone was reading their newspaper by themselves or with a couple. Nobody's talking or interacting. And what that does to your psychology is brings you depression and loneliness, and that's such a huge thing today. So I definitely believe in going out in nature. So redefining luxury, the Four Seasons Hotel was gorgeous, stunning, but it still wasn't like the city of Petra. Still staying in that cave and being in the desert was so much better. So it's like we have to redefine, what do we call luxury? Is it, you're in a big box in the sky and then everyone's in these small little boxes, compared to bringing in community, even at the big hotels, if there's a way to have the roof garden, or even have rooms connect with an outdoor area with, nature somehow. So I just thought, do you remember Lucille Ball? Lucy said, she was on a TV show and her kids were there, and they said, what is the one thing that you remember about being a child? And they said when they went to this little house, a cabin that they had, and she would make them dinner, and they would sit at the same table and eat. And I thought that was so remarkable, because they have all these McMansions everywhere, and what they liked the best was a small cabin because they could all be together. And now with us, for luxury, the richer you are, the bigger the house and more everyone's divided. And when everyone's divided, that's when suicide, and they say in New York, or all the concrete buildings, that's where you get schizophrenia, mental illness, and suicides and crime, compared to places with nature. So the last one is episodes of wonder. And this is the Victory Arch. It's honoring those who fought in the war, the Iran war with Baghdad, to again bring people together. And it's a built structure that when people see it, they feel, again, we're together. It was us against them, and how can we bring everyone else in there? So when in Architecture for Wonder, from all my travels that I did around the world, over 60 countries, I've stayed with the Sufis in Cappadocia, the shamans in Peru, the Aborigines in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand. And what hit me the most is when you enter a space, if you allow the space to enter you. And it's not just the space, it's also feeling like in Petra and some of these outdoor places, it's the space starts to talk to you. It's amazing when you could feel being one with the nature, one with the space. So as architects, I would want to inspire you to go home and even look at your office or your home and think about, what does this say to me? Am I feeling serene? Is this a place that makes me feel happy? Am I feeling creative? What's my imagination doing? And I got that so much, but anytime I came home, I'm going, oh, my home doesn't have this. And now I changed that, but it's really important. So I wanted to just say that you guys are the artists, you guys help create culture, and you guys are a big part of history. So you're in a position to help humans, just like psychologists are, to stay connected and live enriched lives. So I just wanted to get back to Louis Barracon, and any architectural work that does not express serenity is an error. So I hope that came across in this, and I hope your senses are stimulated, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Wow. What an adventure. Yeah.
It was an adventure.
Any questions for Lisa?
Have you been back to Petra since your first visit?
Yes, I've been there a couple times, and hopefully ended up getting married to a Korean woman and moving to Korea.
Korea,
with a Korean woman. So I guess he was interested in a, foreigner.
So what, he runs a Korean barbecue place now? Or?
I don't know. Okay. It was just the most bizarre thing in the world, because I went to the exact same place where he was. I go, wait, where's Hubley? Because he was like the leader of everybody. And he met a Korean girl. I'm like, what? He moved to Korea.
Adventures everywhere, You just never know where it takes you. Anybody else? Wow. I think you got them.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's an interesting trip. How many of you travel? Do you guys travel a lot internationally? Yeah.
Who's tried to get kidnapped? Yeah, okay.
How many of you stay outside in campgrounds or even glamping in nature? Yeah.
Oh.
Does that do the same thing for you? Does that bring serenity and does that change your consciousness? Anytime I write a book, I have to go away and stay in some magical place to start it. Otherwise, I'm at home, I'm writing, nothing comes to me, and then I have to go because their environment is so important.
So how did this lead you to the humanitarian work you do with the kids' hearts thing?
Whispers from Children's Hearts?
Yeah.
Oh, I have a book over there for you guys to see. What happened was when I went to Iraq, this talk wasn't about that, but I went to Iraq, and when I was 16, I got in trouble because I was out before the street lights came on, like 6 o'clock. My dad was really strict, and he said, send her to an orphanage, because he happened to be home. I opened the door. I'm like, what are you talking about? How could you do that? Are you a whore? And I have 4 sisters. So I'm like, no, I was just baking a cake for my friend for school the next day. School's out at 3:30. By the time we got home 4, it's 6 o'clock, And my mom's going, calm down, calm down. And he's like, no, send her to an orphanage. And that always stood with me. I went to my room crying because I loved my dad and we were so close. And that always stayed with me. So when I went to Iraq, I went to his town of Tilkef, which is the Christian Arabs. And I started, knocked on doors, and I was with Ashley, and she grew up there till she was 4. So we went to her house, and they're all caves connected, and they all slept on the rooftops, and all they had there was a school, a church, and an orphanage. And I go, this is it. So I walked into that orphanage, and I said, hi, who are you? And they're like, oh, you're American. You killed our father. My uncle lost his leg, this and that. And I'm like, no, it's politics. We love you. They're like, no, everyone hates us. The whole world's against us. So I said, I'm going to memorialize your words. They're like, what? I said, I have my camera. So I interviewed the kids there. Then I came home and said, what am I going to do with this? And then I started traveling more. I went to Prague, I went to Budapest, Amsterdam, China, Australia, New Zealand, every place. So I started going, let me go to orphanages. So I stayed in orphanages for like 3 weeks or a month, and all these places over a 5-year period. So I went to 15 orphanages and interviewed the kids, and then wrote a book about it. And then that's when I self-published it, and I started giving it to libraries and schools. And then I moved to Barcelona for a semester to put my daughter there for 1st grade, to give her magic and wonder and let her see the world. And I gave it around there. Then I got asked to speak everywhere about this book. So, probably 50 talks to children, high school, little groups, and...
God, you wore me out.
Yeah.
God. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Appreciate you joining us. She'll be around for dinner tonight and stuff, so, you can follow up with any other questions and learn how not to get kidnapped.